The speed at which this conflict is escalating is what's making analysts and observers extremely uneasy. Just a short time ago, the situation was tense, but still somewhat contained, with limited strikes and controlled responses. Now, everything is changing at a much faster pace. Military actions are happening more frequently, and each new strike seems stronger and more direct than the last. This shift from controlled tension to active confrontation is what signals a dangerous turning point. What makes rapid escalation even more concerning is the lack of pause between actions. In many past conflicts, there were moments of hesitation, diplomatic signals, or temporary calm that allowed space for negotiation. But here, the pattern looks different. One strike is immediately followed by retaliation, and that retaliation often triggers an even stronger response. This chain reaction creates a cycle where both sides feel pressured to respond quickly, without fully considering the long-term consequences of their actions. Another critical factor is miscalculation. When events move this fast, the chances of misunderstanding increase significantly. A military move intended as a warning could be interpreted as a major attack. A defensive action could be seen as aggression. In such a high-pressure environment, decisions are often made in minutes, sometimes even seconds, and those decisions can carry massive consequences. A single wrong interpretation could open the door to a much larger confrontation. There is also the psychological aspect of escalation. As the conflict intensifies, both sides begin to feel that stepping back is no longer an option. Backing down can be seen as weakness, especially in front of their own population and allies. This creates a situation where leaders feel compelled to keep pushing forward, even when the risks are clearly increasing. The pressure to maintain strength and dominance often outweighs the need for caution. At the same time, the involvement of advanced military technology is making escalation even more dangerous. Precision strikes, drones, and long-range missiles allow both sides to hit targets quickly and with significant impact. This reduces the time between decision and destruction, leaving very little room for reconsideration once an action has been initiated. The faster the technology, the faster the conflict grows. Global attention is also playing a role in accelerating the situation. Every move is being tracked, reported, and analyzed in real time. This visibility increases pressure on decision-makers as they know the world is watching. In such an environment, actions are sometimes taken not just for military advantage, but also to send a message, which can further intensify the situation. All of this combined creates an environment where the conflict is not just growing. It's accelerating in a way that becomes harder to control with each passing moment. The threat to global oil supply is one of the most critical and sensitive aspects of this entire conflict, and it's the reason why countries far away from the battlefield are already feeling the pressure. The Middle East is not just another region when it comes to energy. It is one of the central hubs of oil production and export for the entire world. A large portion of daily global oil supply passes through this region, making it a vital artery for the global economy. What makes the situation even more fragile is the geography. Much of this oil doesn't just get produced there. It has to travel through narrow maritime routes that are extremely vulnerable during times of conflict. These routes are like choke points, where even a small disruption can have massive consequences. If tensions rise to the point where ships are targeted, delayed, or even threatened, the flow of oil can slow down almost immediately. And the impact of that slowdown is not gradual, it's instant. Global oil markets react within minutes. Prices begin to spike as soon as there is even a hint of instability. Traders and investors don't wait for full confirmation. They act on fear and expectations. This means that even before an actual supply disruption happens, the anticipation alone can push prices higher. Another important factor is how dependent many countries are on imported oil. Nations that do not produce enough energy domestically rely heavily on consistent supply from the Middle East. When that supply is threatened, these countries face immediate challenges. Governments may start tapping into emergency reserves, but those reserves are limited and meant only for short-term relief. Shipping companies also begin to rethink their routes. If certain areas are considered unsafe, ships may take longer, more expensive paths to avoid risk. This increases transportation costs, delays delivery times, and adds another layer of pressure to the already strained supply chain. Insurance costs for oil shipments also rise sharply during conflicts, making the entire process even more expensive. There's also the fear factor that amplifies everything. Even if oil continues to flow, the constant risk of disruption keeps markets unstable. Businesses struggle to plan ahead because prices can change rapidly. Energy companies become cautious, governments start preparing for worst-case scenarios, and the entire system begins to operate under stress. In such conditions, the global oil supply doesn't just become a matter of economics. It becomes a strategic concern. Control over supply routes, protection of tankers, and security of production facilities all turn into top priorities, adding even more tension to an already volatile situation. The economic shockwaves that come from a crisis like this do not stay limited to oil markets or financial headlines. They spread into every layer of daily life, often in ways that people don't immediately realize. When oil prices begin to rise sharply, it creates a domino effect across the global economy. Energy is a foundational cost for almost everything, and when that cost increases, it pushes up the price of nearly all goods and services. Transportation is one of the first sectors to feel the impact. Trucks, ships, airplanes all depend heavily on fuel. As fuel prices climb, the cost of moving goods from one place to another increases. This directly affects supply chains, making it more expensive for businesses to deliver products. Those increased costs are rarely absorbed by companies for long. Instead, they are passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. Food prices are especially sensitive in this situation. Agriculture relies on fuel for machinery, irrigation, and transportation. From farms to markets, every step involves energy. When fuel becomes expensive, the cost of producing and distributing food rises as well. This can lead to noticeable increases in grocery bills, which puts pressure on households, especially in countries where people are already managing tight budgets. At the same time, industries that rely on manufacturing begin to struggle. Factories require energy to operate machinery, maintain production lines, and transport raw materials. As operational costs increase, companies may reduce output, delay expansion plans, or even cut jobs to manage expenses. This can slow down economic growth and increase unemployment, creating a ripple effect that impacts entire communities. Financial markets also react strongly to such uncertainty. Investors tend to move their money into safer assets when they sense instability, pulling funds out of riskier markets. This can cause stock markets to drop, weaken currencies, and reduce overall investment activity. When investment slows down, businesses find it harder to grow, innovate, or even sustain current operations. Inflation becomes one of the most visible consequences. As prices rise across different sectors, fuel, food, transportation, manufacturing, the overall cost of living increases. For ordinary people, this means their money doesn't go as far as it used to. Salaries often don't increase at the same pace as inflation, which leads to reduced purchasing power and financial stress for families. Governments are then forced to respond, often by adjusting interest rates, offering subsidies, or introducing emergency policies. However, these measures can take time to show results and may come with their own challenges, such as increased national debt or slower economic activity. All of these factors combine to create a situation where a conflict in one region begins to reshape economic conditions across the world, affecting businesses, governments, and individuals in ways that continue to unfold over time. The rise of global panic and uncertainty is one of the most powerful and often underestimated consequences of a conflict like this. It doesn't take long for fear to spread once people realize that the situation is not stable and could worsen at any moment. In today's connected world, news travels instantly, and every update, whether confirmed or speculative, has the ability to influence how millions of people think and react. At first, the panic begins in financial markets. Investors closely monitor geopolitical tensions, and the moment they sense risk, they start adjusting their strategies. Stocks can drop rapidly, not necessarily because of actual damage, but because of the fear of what might happen next. This kind of reaction creates volatility, where markets swing unpredictably, making it difficult for businesses and individuals to make confident financial decisions. Governments also begin operating under uncertainty. Leaders are forced to prepare for multiple scenarios at once, including worst-case outcomes. This can involve increasing military readiness, securing critical resources, and coordinating with allies. However, when decisions are made under pressure and incomplete information, the margin for error becomes very small. Even a cautious move can sometimes be misinterpreted by others, adding more tension to an already fragile situation. For ordinary people, the uncertainty becomes personal very quickly. News about rising fuel prices, potential shortages, or expanding conflict zones creates anxiety about the future. People begin to question how it might affect their jobs, their savings, and their daily expenses. In some cases, this leads to precautionary behavior, such as stocking up on essentials or reducing spending, which can further slow down economic activity. Media coverage plays a significant role in amplifying this atmosphere. Continuous updates, breaking news alerts, and dramatic visuals can make the situation feel even more intense. While information is important, the constant flow of alarming headlines can heighten emotional reactions, making the crisis feel closer and more immediate, even for those living far from the conflict zone. There is also a psychological chain reaction that occurs on a global scale. When people see others reacting with concern, it reinforces their own fears. Businesses become cautious, delaying investments or expansion plans. Consumers become more conservative with their spending. Financial institutions tighten lending. All of these responses, driven by uncertainty rather than actual damage, can still have real and lasting economic effects. At the highest level, uncertainty complicates diplomacy. When trust between nations weakens and intentions become unclear, negotiations become more difficult. Each side may assume the worst about the other's actions, reducing the chances of de-escalation. This lack of clarity makes it harder to find common ground, prolonging the situation and increasing the overall risk. In such an environment, the impact of fear and uncertainty goes far beyond immediate events, shaping decisions, behaviors, and outcomes across the world in ways that continue to evolve with every new development. One of the most serious and dangerous dimensions of this situation is the growing risk of wider international involvement. What may begin as a conflict between a few countries rarely stays contained, especially in a region like the Middle East, where political, military, and strategic alliances are deeply interconnected. Every major player in the region has relationships, some public, some behind the scenes, with global powers, and those connections can quickly pull others into the conflict. As tensions rise, allied nations often feel pressure to respond, even if they were not directly involved at the beginning. This pressure can come from defense agreements, political commitments, or the need to protect strategic interests. When one country escalates its actions, its allies may interpret that as a signal to step in, either to support or to counterbalance the situation. This creates a chain reaction where more countries gradually become part of the conflict, increasing its scale and complexity. Military presence in and around the region also plays a significant role. Many powerful nations already have bases, troops, or naval forces positioned nearby. In times of conflict, these forces can be mobilized quickly. What starts as a defensive move, such as protecting assets or ensuring safe passage through key routes, can be perceived by others as preparation for a larger offensive action. This misinterpretation can lead to further escalation, even if the original intent was not aggressive. There is also the issue of proxy involvement. In many cases, countries may not engage directly, but instead support other groups or factions within the region. This indirect involvement can intensify the conflict without officially declaring war, making the situation even more complicated to control. Proxy dynamics often prolong conflicts as multiple parties continue to influence events from different angles. Diplomatic tensions also rise sharply during such times. Countries begin taking sides, issuing strong statements, and imposing sanctions or restrictions. These actions, while not military in nature, still contribute to the overall escalation by increasing hostility and reducing opportunities for peaceful dialogue. Once diplomatic channels become strained, it becomes harder to negotiate ceasefires or agreements. Another important factor is the global strategic balance. Major powers are constantly aware of how their actions might shift influence in the region. No country wants to appear weak or lose its position on the global stage. This competition for influence can drive decisions that prioritize long-term power over short-term stability, further increasing the risk of broader involvement. The more countries that become connected to the conflict, whether directly or indirectly, the harder it becomes to control its direction. Each new participant brings its own interests, strategies, and responses, turning a localized situation into a complex international crisis where outcomes become increasingly unpredictable. The long-term global impact of a conflict like this goes far beyond the immediate headlines and battlefield developments. Even if the intensity of fighting reduces over time, the effects tend to stay embedded in the global system for months or even years. One of the first areas where this becomes visible is in the energy market. Oil prices may eventually stabilize, but they rarely return to previous levels quickly. The uncertainty created during the conflict changes how countries approach energy security, often leading to long-term shifts in supply chains and partnerships. Countries that rely heavily on imported oil may begin to rethink their strategies. This could include investing more in alternative energy sources, building larger strategic reserves, or forming new alliances with different suppliers. These changes don't happen overnight, but once they begin, they reshape the global energy landscape in lasting ways. At the same time, oil-producing nations may adjust their policies to protect their interests, which can further influence global pricing and availability. Economic recovery is another area that takes time. Businesses affected by rising costs, disrupted supply chains, and reduced consumer spending may not bounce back immediately. Some companies may face long-term losses, while others may be forced to restructure or close entirely. This can lead to shifts in industries where certain sectors shrink while others grow in response to the new economic environment. Political relationships between countries are also likely to change. Conflicts often expose weaknesses in alliances or create new opportunities for cooperation. Nations that supported each other during the crisis may strengthen their ties, while those that found themselves on opposing sides may experience lasting tension. These changes can influence future decisions on trade, defense, and diplomacy, shaping international relations for years to come. There is also a strategic learning process that takes place. Governments and military organizations analyze what happened, what worked, and what failed. This leads to changes in defense strategies, investment in new technologies, and adjustments in how future conflicts are approached. The lessons learned from one conflict often influence how the next one is handled, making the impact extend far beyond the present moment. On a societal level, the effects can be deeply personal and long-lasting. People who experience economic pressure, job instability, or rising living costs may change their spending habits and financial priorities. This shift in behavior can influence markets and economies in subtle but meaningful ways over time. Even in regions far from the conflict, the ripple effects can alter how people plan for the future. All of these elements combine to create a situation where the consequences of the conflict continue to unfold long after the immediate events have passed, gradually shaping global systems, relationships, and decisions in ways that are not always immediately visible but remain significant over time.